Well, good morning, everybody. It's time to get this fuel system redone. And we finally got Dexter back out in the garage. He wants to check everything out. I wanted to show a little bit about the fuel hose and fittings that I'm using. This is kind of a review. I've been using all Evil Energy PTFE hose and fittings. So here, this is 6AN, some aftermarket billet fuel rails. Pretty simple system. We're going to be upgrading to 8AN Evil Energy PTFE hose. So this hose and fittings is 3 years old. I've had zero problems, never had a single leak, not even from the beginning. You just got to do your due diligence when putting these fittings together, the ends, and you won't have any problems with this stuff. I think it's very well built. I know some people scoff at using Chinese fuel fittings on their cars, and I can totally understand that. But some of us are not independently wealthy, and we have to make do where we can. I'm going to be, like I said, switching this over to 8AN. And also switching this fuel configuration into it's going to be a loop through the rails to the regulator. It's the best way to do it. Currently it is regulator first. This is a return, and this is the feed deadheaded straight to the rails. For those of you that are here for just the Evil Energy part of it, this is the $65 kit that you get on Amazon. Comes with this tool for opening up the end of the PTFE liner. You'll use this, it works well. You get two 90-degree fittings, two straights, and two 45s, and two separator clamps. You get 10 feet of hose. And yes, they took that whole little hose there and had it coiled up in this tiny little box. So I always set it out for a few days to get resituated. I also bought a whole bunch more Evil Energy fittings, 90s straights, lots of straights. A lot of guys will tell you that if you're going to use the Evil Energy kits or any of the offshore kits, try and use as many straights as possible, because a straight doesn't have an O-ring in it anywhere. It's just the line nut or B-nut. Whereas anything that has this auxiliary tube to it to create a bend has a secondary O-ring in here. It's another leak point. Me personally, I've never had a single problem with them, so I use them to make the cleanest installation. I'm also going to be switching out my 6AN fuel regulator for an 8AN regulator. Some of this might be overkill to the problems we were experiencing on the dyno, but I don't really care. I'd rather build for the future and be done with it. So I'm going to get this all taken apart, and then I'm going to set up kind of my base foundation, get some of my fittings in place, and then I will go over putting one of these hose ends on. And it's pretty straightforward. You will need a vise. I've tried using some of the aluminum wrenches and also soft jaws in my vise, and to be quite honest with you, I found myself making more of a mess out of trying to install a hose end. I made more of a mess out of the fittings trying to install this nut onto the hose using soft jaws and an aluminum wrench. I found just putting the fitting in a vise and using a regular high quality wrench, you can put these together with less marring than trying to do it the safe way. That's just been my experience. So that's enough rambling for now. Let me get this tore apart and we'll get back after it. I'm getting ready to put in some of the Evil Energy fittings. This is a 8AN to 8 orb. See if I can get a better backdrop here. I've never had any problems with the Evil Energy 8 AN fittings. They come with the O-rings on the orb side. The O-rings have always worked. I've never had a problem with them leaking or falling apart or doing anything stupid. These fittings seem to be very good quality for the money. I always put full torque on them. Never been scared of breaking one. So yeah, on my rails, now I'm gonna have a in and out on both rails. Whereas before I had these plugs in there on one end since we were deadheaded. But I'm gonna get all these fittings put in, and then we'll move on to making some hoses. All right, after an overnight intermission, I got the fuel rails put in, injectors obviously put in, and I went ahead and made the crossover line that goes behind the supercharger. That was a little bit of a treat, but we got her done. Now I'm gonna start building the lines that are easier to kind of show as an example how to put those together. You don't have to worry too much about the hose and getting a little dirt and dust in there, because you're going to be trimming the hose with a abrasive disc anyways, which is what I found is the easiest way to do it. So you really got to wash these lines out with either solvent, or I've actually used hot water to rinse the lines out, as long as I know I have time to get them all the water blown out and dried up. Obviously you don't want to contaminate your injectors with water. This is an example of some Evil Energy's packaging. So here's a straight fitting. This is going to be obviously that's the B-nut. This is going to be the part that goes over the hose. And this is the ferrule, I guess you would call this piece. And this is what locks onto the PTFE. So your hose will slip onto here. This will be pushed into the end of the hose. This will already be on the hose. We'll go over that when we actually put it together. But I need this piece to show getting the hose length. So this particular hose is going to come off of this rail right here, and then it's simply going to loop around and come into the regulator. I'm using straight fittings here. It's really the best solution for this kind of tight arrangement. This radius is probably 2 or 3 inches anyways. Not too tight of a bend at all for that PTFE hose. It will not kink in that situation. I'm going to go grab a length of the hose, and we'll kind of wrap that around and get a length that we want. Let's see if I can do this without knocking the camera over. So I'm literally going to insert that onto the fitting. Okay. I'm going to take this guy and kind of wind it up. Ow, that hurts. There is metal braid in here, so you got to be careful with this stuff. I'm going to go a little tiny bit extra long, so I use a silver marker, silver Sharpie. It writes really good on this cloth braid, so I can set up my length. Now I gotta get this back off of here. So you can see my mark right there. So this is just how I usually do this. I take electrical tape, try not to stretch the electrical tape too tight at first, and literally I just put the electrical tape dead center on my silver Sharpie mark, and then when we go to make our cut, we're just going to cut in the middle of the tape. Probably 3 or 4 wraps. That should get the job done. Okay, now we're ready to cut. if you get a little bit of a crooked cut, like this piece, you can actually trim this up with like a flap disc in a grinder motor, and it doesn't seem to want to fall apart on you, which is good. No copyright strikes. In this case, I'm going to be using a simple cutoff disc and a 90-degree air motor. I usually like to try and kind of brace myself against something to try and make a halfway decent straight cut. Hey, look, my hand's right in the way. Let's go across the vise. Not too bad. I'll straighten this one up a little bit. Like I said a minute ago, there's wire in here, so try not to poke yourself. If you're going to be doing this all day, put on some ear protection. Don't be like me. If you get any little pieces of braid that kind of get folded up in there, you can get some small clippers, and I'm just using a pair of snap-on flush cutters. Okay, so that's going to be the nut for that end. And I stand corrected. You only need to get the nut put on the outside of the hose. The ferrules are going to go in the end over the PTFE. So that guy's going to go on this way. Got to try not to smush the tape off of there until this guy's on there. So both nuts are on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and peel the tape off. Sometimes it's a little tricky to find the end, especially when you're blind. We got our ends trimmed. I went ahead and peeled the tape off of this end. We're getting ready to insert the ferrule or collar that's going to lock on to the PTFE. Now before we do that, we're going to take a pick and we're going to carefully open this braid up so that it opens up a little gap between the PTFE and the braid so that the ferrule has somewhere to go. This is kind of your last chance to trim this up if she's not quite square. I may actually trim her up just a little bit. Flush cutters come in really handy for this. Just trimmed off that little piece right there. When we push this ferrule on, it's got a shoulder that's going to stop on the end of the PTFE. So you want to make sure you don't get any braid trapped underneath of this ferrule. Okay, so a lot of times what I'll do now that that's started on there, I'll put it up against a piece of my bench and push that all the way on there. Hopefully the lighting's good enough to show that that PTFE is all the way to that shoulder. This is about how much of a gap you're usually going to wind up with on the braid. And that should be more than enough for the nut to capture this braid. So now we're going to take this tool and we're just going to kind of work this into that PTFE. That really seats that PTFE into that ferrule. It's got grooves in it that bite into the plastic. Now we're going to take our fitting, a little spittle on there, and that should go in there. It's a tight one. If you feel any resistance, check it out. Make sure nothing's getting tore up. There she goes. Now you can kind of get a picture of how all this stuff gets locked together. I find that the straight fittings are the hardest to put on because they don't give you very much of a flat here to grab onto. And I've been putting this in the vise to hold it. So you got to get it just right. This might seem kind of odd, but what I found works really well to lube this thread up a little bit so it doesn't gall up when you're torquing the nut down is I put a little bit of air tool oil on these threads. It really seems to help these go together nicely. Doesn't take a whole lot. Hopefully y'all aren't like totally crooked. You can see somewhat of what I'm doing. And yes, this is steel jaws because I don't want this to move at all. I'd rather have a few little marks on here than have it slip. Okay, now we're going to take this nut, kind of force it down over the braid, and then it's going to start on the threads. As you get down tighter and tighter, you might find that it wants to kind of spin the hose around. It's okay, you can just let it do that. This particular size, these are 8AN, uses a 15/16 wrench. And if you just go real nice and easy with it, you won't tear them up. It won't mar the finish. I just take little bites at it so that I'm not trying to twist the thing against the vise. And when it stops, you don't need to torque it like a madman. Just snug. Everything's still looking good. Okay, see, even that, when I bumped it, she twisted on me a little bit, which is probably going to scratch it some. Give her a little tweak in there, a little torque. Just some small little marks. It wouldn't have done that if I wouldn't have slipped it in the vise. I've tried soft jaws, I've tried aluminum jaws, and they all end up doing more damage than that. On the next one, I'll do even better. But that's it. That's all there is to that. Putting that, you couldn't pull this apart. You could probably attach it between two trucks and you'd have a hell of a time pulling that apart. Okay, right when you think we're getting down to the end is where you want to be careful. because when that stops, it wants to have a tendency to slip in the vice jaws. Should be getting close. I think that was it. Okay. I think we might have had success on this one. Much less marks, just some small little marks on there. You can just see a few little frays on that braid. I don't like that, but you won't see it when it's put together. Okay, so I'm going to go show you guys the hose installed, but it's not going to get finished installed because I need to wash this out. Need to flush this hose because it's full of dust and grinder dust and who knows what else has gotten in there. Well, I have to confess, I made a little bit of a mistake. It is now day 2 of this operation. When you're buying all your parts to build these fuel systems, when you go to buy additional hose ends, you need to make absolutely sure that you order, in this case, hose ends that are made for PTFE hose. I had stupidly ordered a bunch of hoses or hose ends for regular rubber hose. They're totally different. You can't not intermix them. So thankfully the big Amazons had the ones that I needed and I was able to get them today. Unfortunately, I don't have any. I took back the wrong ones already. What are you doing, Dexter? You look like you're staring into the corner like you've been bad. So with that being said, I'm down to my last hose to put together. Are you done out here, pup? So I got the return done, a U into the regulator. Then I got my feed done to the Y block. This portion of the Y block is capped off. And then this guy is the feed, the beginning of the feed from the Y block to this passenger fuel rail right here. So let's get this hose built. It's enough rambling. Hey, why don't we have an airplane fly over right now? Okay, we're ready to do our first leak check of the new hoses and hose ends and rails and O-ring injector and injector O-rings. Get a high quality torch. We're also going to see what the fuel pressure is sitting at not running. I've gone around and triple checked that all the line nuts are tight. Key on. Okay, I think we're going to try that. Go ahead and go key off one more time. If you're wondering what that noise is, it's running the whole time the key is on. It is not the fuel pump. That is actually intercooler pump. Everything looks really good. It wouldn't have hurt anything if we would have started it, if it would have started, but I've got to load the new tune into the car's computer with my laptop for the updated injector data. Then we can start it. Okay, we got the tune loaded up for the new injector change. We're going to go ahead and try and start it. So we had a couple of small leaks on our first engine startup. You definitely want to check for leaks while the engine is running after you do your preliminary leak checks. Everything looked fine on our preliminary leak checks when we just had the pump pressurized, but then we had a couple of small leaks pop up while it was actually running. This fitting right here was leaking, and all I did was crack it while it was still pressurized very carefully, and then retorqued it. Not gorilla tight, but just a good torque, and that leak stopped. And then I had a leak on the regulator, also one of the B-nuts right here. This guy was leaking. Did the exact same thing, and it stopped leaking. None of the hose ends leaked anywhere, so very happy to see that. After we got our regulator adjusted, we let it run for a little while. Just triple check everything. The last thing you want is a fire. Checked all the injector O-rings, every fitting that we made, the cap, all the orb fittings where they have O-rings into the fuel rails and the regulator. Got to check it all. Make sure it doesn't leak. But we're ready to road test. I personally can't recommend the Evil Energy PTFE hose and their fittings enough. I'm really happy with them. They're very budget friendly. I think I redid this whole engine bay from 6AN up to 8AN for maybe $120 with all the fittings and the hose that I used. So if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, tips, tricks, things to do this easier, better, faster, by all means put them down in the comments below. If you had a terrible experience with this company or this hose product, put it down in the comments below. I'd like to hear about it. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I ran 6AN Evil Energy PTFE hose for the last 3 years, and I've had zero problems with it. Any of the hose, the O-rings, fittings, none of it. It all works as advertised. So my next project is going to be to put in the external large fuel pump for while the engine is under boost. And when that gets plumbed into the system, it's going to be in parallel with the stock system, and it's actually going to go into the Y block where this cap is at. So I'll have to route the hose up through here somehow to get it to here. That'll be a story for another day, and hopefully this helps somebody. We'll see y'all on the next one.